Survivor Specialist Phil and Alexa are back, and today we have a very special episode. We are joined by Sierra Schultzzie. This is the first time ever that we're having somebody who's not a former Survivor player on the Survivor Specialist. Sierra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I am so honored. I am such a big fan of you guys, and I don't get to talk about Survivor on my channel or in my real life, really. So I feel like I'm getting to talk Survivor just by listening to you guys, and now I actually get to be part of the conversation. So I'm just super, super stoked. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Welcome.
it was
here to nerd out. We'll talk Survivor.
Do it. And it was funny because how it came to be was my friend was working for you and she was like, hey, so my boss really likes you guys. I'm like, your boss on like the TV show you were like, what is it? And she was like, no, Sierra, look her up. And I was like, she has 1.9 million followers. What is she doing? Listen to the Survivor Special. Our hap's over there if you want to go over there. But
no, I'm so like honored to be here. Like I said, I am a huge fan of you guys, and you know, my channel, I talk about fashion and body positivity, so really nothing to do with Survivor. The only kind of Survivor-y thing I've gotten to do on my channel is I did a Brent Seal simulation on my podcast. But we did it with YouTubers. So it was like a Survivor YouTuber crossover thing. And it was so much fun. And I was surprised at how much of my audience is also Survivor fans. So super excited to be here and get to bring out my nerdy Survivor side.
I hope everybody who is a Survivor fans tuned in. I hope you brought all your fans over.
I hope so.
It's one of those things. It's like when you talk about Survivor, nobody like actually admits it. You know, people don't admit they still watch it because it's just one of those things. It's been on so long, nobody openly talks about it. But then you get into these communities and you realize a lot more people watch that show than you would think.
Oh yeah, and like I thought before I discovered like the Survivor online community of like Reddit and podcasts and all of that, I thought I was a Survivor specialist. I was like, no one knows more about Survivor than me. I am like the nerd Survivor of my family. And then when I got online, I was like, oh, I am nothing. Everyone has everything memorized and they know all of these and they know all about Edgic and all about all these people's different stats. And I'm like, okay, never mind. I bow down. I don't know anything.
I'm deep in the memes. I'm nowhere with Edgic. So there's a line, like everyone has a line.
Well, and it's funny too, because when we'll go live, we have the chat over on the side and we'll say one thing and we'll say, you know, somebody finished 8th place and the chat will just be like, they finished 6th and they received 4 votes, not 5 votes. And you're just like, oh my gosh. Like when you're talking about it on the fly, it's not the encyclopedic knowledge that I wish I had. Although we just did a trivia game that was run by one of our patrons, McKenna Feeney, and Andy Vogel probably does have an encyclopedic knowledge. So there's my shout out to Andy Vogel.
There's the shout out.
It just never stops. He just keeps going. He killed our trivia game too.
Sierra, tell us a couple seasons you like. Tell us a couple players you like.
Yeah, I think, you know, my all-time favorite season will always be Heroes versus Villains because I think that was the first season where I really got into Survivor. I'm 24, so I like have been watching it since I was 7 or 8, pretty much most of my life. And so I don't think until Heroes versus Villains I really got into it and was like, oh, I am a Survivor fan. So I think that'll always be my favorite season. And then recently, actually kind of at the beginning of quarantine, I went back and watched all the earlier seasons that I had watched as a kid. And I realized how much gold there is in those earlier seasons. And so I feel like recently I've been more into kind of the early seasons because I never really realized how great they were.
Mm-hmm. This is the right podcast to be on them because we love the old seasons. I was doing a rewatch of the first 6 with my girlfriend who had never watched them, and I'm like, oh, this is so good. Everyone, when you start saying words like Thailand is actually pretty good, you know that you like the old seasons.
That's like real. That's huge.
Yeah.
It's so fun watching the old seasons too that you haven't watched in a while and like forgetting the big moments, and then they happen and you're like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot that was a thing. Or watching it with someone who hasn't watched them before. I feel like whenever I watch a season with my husband, who's like a casual, he will forget things that happened or he hasn't seen certain seasons. And I'm just sitting there like, you ready for what's about to happen? This is going to be good.
when I was telling my girlfriend how great the season 3 pre-merge was, and she's watching it and she's like, I hate this. This is awful. And then as soon as that swap hit, I was like, wasn't it all worth it? But you had to sit there for 4 episodes with a huge smile on your face, just waiting for it. Who's some of your favorite players?
Not to be super basic, and I'm sure everyone has this opinion right now, but Tony was just so fun to watch on this last season. I feel like my expectations for him were a lot lower going into season 40 because of Game Changers. And I feel like every episode I kept waiting for the Tony blindside to come, and it never did. And he was just so fun to watch. I will always love Parvati because, like I said, I grew up watching those earlier seasons. So when I was a kid, I always wanted to play Survivor. And I used to always say, oh my gosh, when I play, I'm going to play like Parvati. And then I really like Natalie Anderson. I think she's probably my top favorite.
Would you say that
finale then?
Yeah.
I was going to say,
yeah.
would you say that Natalie Anderson deserved second place on this last season? And answer wisely, Sierra. Answer wisely.
It's been a great 5 minutes, but
I know I'm going to tank it all from here. I have very strong opinions about Edge, and I don't like Edge. So even though I really liked Natalie Anderson, I have to say no, just because I don't like Edge. I feel like it kind of takes away a lot of the integrity of the game, and it kind of lowers the stakes. I grew up in theater, so to me, it's all about the stakes of how dramatic can you make things. And when you put in Edge, you lower the stakes, and it becomes less dramatic because it's not, oh my gosh, this person I loved is gone from the game. It's, oh, well, maybe they'll come back. I don't know. Yeah. And so I feel like it really does kind of take a little bit of that integrity out of the game. And I know it's a lot of people agree with me with that on Edge, but I also really like Natalie Anderson, so I get it.
I always say that like Edge of Extinction reminds me of, I don't know if you watch American Horror Story, but the third season with the witches. Well, in the witches season, like in the first two seasons, if somebody died, they were dead. They might come back as a ghost or something, but they were dead. And then all of a sudden the witches season happened and people would like die. And then the next episode, they're like, I'm actually alive. And you're like, okay, like it, like then as they die, it's just, you're just numb to it because you're like, all right, whatever. Like I know they're gonna come back, and that's what Edge of Extinction is. It's like, oh man, Ethan, it's so heartbreaking, but I'm still gonna get to watch them.
Well, I feel like also Edge makes me read more into the edit because then I start thinking, why are they showing so much of this person if they got voted out? They have to come back into the game. They have to be the one who comes back. And so I like to not try to read into the edit because I feel like it can give stuff away. And I feel like with Edge, it can be almost impossible to not.
Exactly. Right. Especially with Natalie Anderson in this last season. You would have thought that she played the most perfect game in the history of the show.
9 billion fire tokens in her pocket.
Yeah, when she didn't come back at the merge, that's when I started to be like, oh, I think I see where this is going, because they wouldn't be showing her so much if she wasn't the one who ends up coming back in.
Absolutely. So the reason we have you on here is because we figured this would be a good crossover to do, where we talk about social media and how it's starting to impact Survivor. You said you were big with body positivity and you have a huge social media presence. And a lot of people who go on to Survivor don't have a huge social media presence before they go on there. And then they come
body shame them.
Yeah, exactly. And they either come back and they're super excited when they come back, or David Spade makes a video about them on Comedy Central where they blur out their chest. So these fun types of things. And I think people just, sometimes they're just not ready for it. So we want to like try to help people who are going to be on season 41, season 42, 43, whenever they might air. How are they going to be able to navigate this thing? We figured it'd be great to talk with you, Sierra.
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing that I have learned from being online is that you can't control how people are going to react to you. You can only control what you say and what you put online. But that gets complicated when, me as a YouTuber, I get to choose what is shown to the world. I'm the one editing it and watching it back and choosing how things are going to be presented. Whereas people who go on Survivor, they don't have that agency over the way that they're portrayed on the show. And so they may go out there and think they were acting a certain way, and they may be edited in a different way or shown in a different way. And so I think a lot of people are unprepared for the backlash, because I think everyone's the hero in their own head, right? Everyone's the main character of their own story. And so I don't think anyone comes back from any sort of reality TV show, but specifically Survivor, and thinks, okay, people are going to hate me. They think I'm going to be the one that people love, or I'm going to be shown this way. And so I think it can be a really tough awakening when you come back and the show starts airing and you realize that people aren't on your side, and, things were shown differently than you experienced them. And I just can't even imagine how tough that is to deal with, because at least for me, I get to choose what's shown and what's portrayed.
Yeah. And I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of people. I think that like nails it right on the head because, I mean, if you're in the case of Dan from season 39, you knew that it was going to be bad when you came back. But then there's other players who you're just like, I wasn't that villainous. Like I was a good person the entire time. And it gets kind of lost in the shuffle. And then we obviously go over to Twitter and Instagram, and everything is just, we hate you. And we hope you all that positivity.
Well, and I think people don't tend to think of public figures, whether it be a YouTuber or a traditional actor or a reality star, as three-dimensional people. They think of them as the character that they see on the show. So when they're talking about this person that they hated, most people are thinking of it like the way they would say they hate a character on a fictional show. But what they forget is that's a real person. And when you're commenting that on their Instagram, that's not a character. That's a real person who's reading that and living through their life like that. And so I think there needs to be a lot more, I guess, people need to think of public figures, actors, specifically reality stars, as three-dimensional people and complex people, and not just the character that they were in this very small snapshot that was shown on your TV.
And you see this more in the earlier seasons. I mean, your favorite season is heroes versus villains. Doing a heroes versus villains season now would be different because I think they edit people to be more complex. Like Jamal, I think, is a great example where the first 3 episodes we were told he's lazy, which is a whole other conversation. And he's this villain. He doesn't take his bags to tribal council. And then he ends up being our fallen hero.
Right.
And all of those things, everything that came out of his mouth, every action he did. But when spliced contextually, sure, you can make him look like a terrible guy, or you can make him look like something. And now I think so few players go out and say, I want to be a villain. Like Joe from HHH. I think he went out there and he was like, I'm going to kick some ass. I'm going to do whatever. But I think people, I mean, myself included, would be so nervous to go out now and say, I want to be this, I want to be a villain and I want to backstab people, because you would be terrified of being ruined when you came back.
Right. And we see it in that. I think it used to be that people thought of that as just, they were a villain on the show. And I think now with social media and, in the earlier seasons, you didn't follow someone on social media after the show. You watched them on the show and then that was it. And right. you didn't continue to follow their life and who they were after that. And now when people are following these players on social media and continuing to keep up with them, that persona of who they were on the show continues to follow them after. And the backlash that someone who was a villain in, an earlier season would have faced would have been so short and pretty much just in the time that the show was airing, versus now that will continue for years and years after.
Well, and I think Courtney Yates is a good example of this, because when Courtney Yates goes and plays in Survivor China, she said some things that had people rolling their eyes and cringing and going, oh my God, what a terrible person, when she's talking about Denise, when she's talking about Leslie. But we all love Courtney Yates. And really the backlash she received was when that episode aired up until the next week when the episode aired again. And I think that's what's kind of crazy about this is back then, Russell Hantz is really lucky he played in season 19 and season 20 and not season 31 and season 32, because he wouldn't be continuing to play Survivor. So it is interesting, how this persona does follow you. And do you think it's impacting the way that people are actually playing Survivor because they're worried about the real life implications?
Oh, 1,000%. I think people are probably a lot less likely to say what's on their mind, to even want to go on the show, because I think when you're out there and you're being filmed 24/7 and you're out there for theoretically up to 39 days, you aren't going to be able to polish yourself the way that you have this idea of how you want to come off on screen for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 39 days. It's not going to happen. And so I think I would suspect that a lot of potential players have said, maybe I don't want to subject myself to this, not because of the elements, not because of the physical challenges, not because of the deprivation, because of the backlash that could come after the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of players, they, you probably, you think about someone like Aurora, perhaps. She probably, if you splice together every single confessional, every single time she's on screen, you probably get a collective 2 hours. You probably don't get a gigantic amount of time, yet one confessional, one even just snarky comment. I mean, Ben from this season was torched for being angry at Jeremy and being short with him. But as interviews came out, you learn his side of the story, and that completely changes the context. But Ben's not allowed to go out on Twitter and say, guys, like, I was mad because of this, because he signed his life away, which is a decision that everyone who goes out there makes. But I think the lack of not being able to defend yourself and the lack of control at how you're being portrayed is probably terrifying.
Yeah, I feel like, I feel like that would add a whole nother layer of, is it worth playing Survivor? Is it worth putting myself out there? Is it worth possibly subjecting myself to this kind of scrutiny?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people go through right now. I want to give the shout out to Rachel Rambles, though, who's in the chat now, and she's giving the shout outs to Sierra and Phil. That's who connected us. So if anybody wants to go and follow Rachel Rambles, go and do that. She watches us all the time, Alexa. I don't know how somebody who's friends with me could also sit down and watch us. I don't know how they deal with it.
How do you do it? I can't handle like 2 hours of him a week.
I know. It's terrible. I don't know how she does it, but she does listen, and she's here. But I kind of want to go off of what you were just saying, Sierra, because the real world implications and all of that, and making you second guess if you would play. And, I think we see it now, especially in season 40. We had that whole incident where I don't even know what to call it an incident, but we had the whole situation on Twitter where somebody put out people's political affiliations, who assumed political affiliations. And they literally made it from darkest blue to darkest red, and there were light colors in there and question marks and all of this. And I go back to season 1. You don't really know the politics. I mean, you knew the politics of Rudy. That's really essentially where you knew the politics of Rudy. You knew the politics of Rich Hatch. Yeah. But aside from that, you start going through the game, and I can guarantee that there's people here who are watching who you were rooting for people who did not have the same politics as you. And, it's a different time, obviously, but has this just gotten to a point where now it's like, okay, this has nothing to do with like what is going on? And is it like worth it for a lot of these people to know that they could be run off of social media and like have their lives blown up because the internet doesn't agree with who they voted for, or some of the internet doesn't agree with who they voted for?
I think the main reason we see that is because we're seeing now reality stars become influencers when their show airs. And so instead of them being a character on TV and then them being done, now they're also an influencer, a person who you're following and you're continuing to engage with and support. And I think in the same way that we see influencers and YouTubers getting called out for their beliefs, their affiliations, that now passes over to past Survivor players. And people are thinking, well, what does this person believe? Do I want to continue supporting them and watching them? And do I want to continue following them if their beliefs don't line up with mine? And I think that really does stem from the fact that these people are now much more than just a reality star or much more than a TV character, but they're an influencer.
Mm-hmm. And Phil, going back to season 1, people always say, like, if you put Rudy on season 41, do people like him or do people hate him? And I don't know, because people still to this day love Rudy. They love the jokes that Rudy made. They make the same jokes that Rudy made. They're directly quoting him. And I love that that's the first season, because again, Rudy was complex, and Rudy and Richard, their relationship was so out of left field, and it's something nobody would have ever expected. And it's almost something that now would probably bring people together. I know that, and well, let me say, I hope that Survivor will never do a Democrats versus Republicans. But if they did, I would almost want it to be rigged so that like there's a bipartisan alliance.
Right. There would have to be.
Exactly. But that's, instead everyone's like, no, think about the conflicts. But actually having two people who are so different stemmed into one of the greatest friendships that we've ever seen out of the show, and a really, really good lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what you said, if Rudy played now in 2020, I think there would be no way it would be received the way it was then. Because I think, our society and just the climate that we're in has evolved so much, and for good reason. I think it's a good thing. But I think then that kind of changes the way that we look back on old seasons and old players and how they would be perceived now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm not going to quote what Dr. Sean says at the final tribal council, but he says what he says to Hatch, and Hatch just laughs and is like, yeah, that was my idea. I was sitting there watching it with my girlfriend and her mom, and her mom was like, they just said that on TV. Oh my God. And like, obviously her mom's older, so she has seen those types of things on TV, but you have Dr. Sean dropping a hard F on TV. And you're just like, wow, he just like went out and said that. And Hatch sits there and is like, that was my idea. I think it's great. And like, you're just like, wow, like how things have changed. And, you know, I sit there and I'm like I agree, like things do need to change, but I worry, like, or not that I worry, but I wonder, like, the way that we perceive the older seasons and things like that, the people were getting along on the island, though. And does that say something about society then too? Because we see a lot of people get hate maybe for their beliefs on Twitter or whatever it is, but on the island, they all seem to get along. I mean, Wendell and Sarah, who are on very opposite ends of the spectrum, obviously, they got along on the island. And I just wonder if maybe the old school, they didn't take it as personally. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but they just didn't.
And I think it goes back to what something that you'd referenced earlier, Sierra, but you're on this island and you're in a bubble. And in earlier seasons, you're in a bubble, and I can go play Survivor with someone who has completely different political views as I do. And then we can go home and get dinner together and have a great time. But now I'm going to come back. I'm going to stalk them on the internet. I'm sure I'll find one thing that I don't agree with. And is that personally, that shouldn't or wouldn't ruin my relationship with them. But I think if one person finds that tweet from 2017, blows them up, then you almost can't recover from it.
Yeah. I think it's definitely going to change the way that people act on Survivor. And I think it actually already has. And I think if we look at the way that people act when they're on the show and when they come back, it's very different than it was before.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah. I mean, season 40, and these are people who have won before, they've played before, they've won before. Some of them have also lost before. 3 people deleted their Twitter accounts. Adam Klein came on our podcast and said, if anyone ever goes on Survivor, lock your Instagram account. To me, going out and like being able to kind of brag about it on the internet sounds kind of fun. Like, look at this life stream I'm living. Yeah. And then to do that and just be completely bombarded, that I understand the toll that takes on people. And I feel for them, because you're living your dream and some stranger's going to try to ruin that.
Yeah. And I think it just becomes really overwhelming knowing that people are watching and analyzing and judging all of those, every little move that you make outside the show. Because I think when people go on the show, they expect that, right? They're like, okay, I'm putting myself into this situation where I'm going to be watched and shown and analyzed and scrutinized for this period of 39 days. But I think what a lot of people don't realize when they go and they sign that contract and they agree to that isn't just for that 39 days. That's now going to continue when you get home. My best friend actually just decided to like quit the internet altogether. She had almost 50,000 followers on Instagram, and she deleted all of it because she was kind of in that same mindset of, it's not worth it. It's too much. It's not what I want. And I think a lot of people go on reality TV expecting to come back and then enjoy having this kind of notoriety now, but they don't think about the other side, where at what cost.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And that's something though that Alexa and I have dealt with too, where it's just like I was logged off of the like Twitter and everything for pretty much the entire month of June. And like at least I have the advantage of having a podcast partner. So Alexa can go on there and post what we need to post or say what she saw and like whatever. But like I try to stay away from it as much as possible because it's just not really who I am. I don't post, like I never posted a lot even before I did the Survivor podcast. I know Alexa doesn't post all that much either. Like that's not really who we are. But you know, you still want to be involved because that is how you build something out on the internet. And I understand you go and play Survivor and you're a fan favorite like Rick Devens. You want to be bigger. You want people to know who you are and you want to share your opinions and you want to engage in the dialogue. The good thing for Rick is he doesn't have as many haters as, you know, some of these other players and you know, maybe Nick Wilson or something. Nick Wilson's not as big of a character as Rick, but it's just, it's like, is it worth it? And how far do you go with it? And my question to you, Sierra, is like, what do you recommend for people who are going to be playing on next, like on season 41, 42? Do you just delete your Twitter and everything before you go out there and start over?
You know, actually, that's not a bad idea. I think my biggest piece of advice would be creating spaces on the internet that aren't public, and then creating spaces that are dedicated to being public, and understanding where to draw those boundaries. So if you're going to go out on Survivor, maybe do start a new Twitter, an Instagram, TikTok, whatever you're going to do, under whatever name you want it to be on online. And then that way you can keep some privacy and keep spaces where you can just share with your personal friends, and you don't have to worry so much about, I wanted to post this to share with my family or my friends, but what are people online going to think about it? And are they going to hyper analyze it? And are they going to look too much into it? And instead just kind of starting new and saying, this is my public platform. This is my public Twitter. And I think it's really difficult to go back and undo that once you've already started it and saying, oh, no, now I'm going to start a new Twitter and I'm going to delete it and whatever. I say just create one that's public and then one that's yours for your family and friends if you're going out on Survivor, and do that before the show airs.
Yeah. Well, and like Wendell, we had Wendell on the podcast, and he came onto our podcast. I think it was literally 5 days after George Floyd had been murdered. So that's how quickly he came onto our podcast, and he had gone on Russell Hanson's, but then he came onto ours, and he was saying to us, like, he was having a hard time with this. And what he was saying is obviously the thing that the internet was saying as well, but he was having a hard time because he wanted to have good time Wendell. Like, I'm going to have fun. I'm going to post things that are positive about Survivor. Look at this experience I had and all of that. But he could not get past the fact that somebody who looked like him had been murdered. Like, that's how he kept on putting it. And he just kept saying that. And so I feel like he was having that hard time too, because for him, it's like, I want to have that fun space and that exciting space, but also I feel like I need to have the serious conversations as well. And I do think that your advice of having kind of two different spaces, and I'm not saying like Wendell should have two different spaces, I'm just saying it's good advice because you can kind of have like your more lighthearted side, and then you're more like very serious, especially when, there's so much serious that goes on every day, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just creating those divides into what you're comfortable sharing, and then what you maybe are just comfortable keeping to yourself, and drawing those boundaries. And I think a lot of the times we don't draw those boundaries until it's too late. Mm-hmm. And so I would really recommend just making sure that you draw those boundaries. And I think one of the most interesting things with Survivor that we see on social media versus other reality shows, no one really goes on Survivor because they want to become like an influencer, like they do on The Bachelor. Like the whole point of most people going on The Bachelor is so that they can get Sugar Bear hair sponsorships. Mm-hmm. But you don't see that on Survivor. Like, no one is signing up for Survivor so that they can become famous. And I think that is super interesting. And that's a super interesting aspect of how social media plays into the game. Because I feel like it's one of the very few like protected, I guess, reality shows where what people's intentions are going on the show, and it's probably not to get Sugar Bear hair sponsorships.
And I think that's kind of why it bothers me so much when I see a lot of these Survivor players get demolished on Twitter. And I think that's what bothers me is like, I know that they're doing this for the dream. They're not like, especially nowadays, like there was that period in the 20s where you could crap on half the cast and I'd be like, whatever. But nowadays, like, we know the stories of these players. We know how long it took them to get on the show. We know everything they went through to get there. They are really living out their dream of playing this game. And like, to know that that was their intention, and they're playing a game that is meant to be backstab, hate this person, bring out the worst in people. And then they come back to their real life and they get ripped apart. Like, Alexa and I have both met Nick Wilson numerous times, and I'm like, I really like Nick Wilson.
Wonderful.
Like, I really like Nick Wilson. And then like, I really like Adam Klein. Like, what did Adam Klein do to any of you? And so that's what's kind of difficult about this. And I think that's why, like, in the Survivor community, at least for the podcasters and such, and we had done that podcast with Rob Cesternino and Lauren Beck and Shannon, I think the reason why it's so much more personal is because we all feel like that could be us. Whereas with Big Brother, it's like, whatever. Yeah. Like, they brought it on themselves, but this feels like it could be me.
Oh yeah. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are like super fans and part of the online community have probably either applied or thought about applying to play Survivor. And so I think, we know the intentions and we know why they're doing it. And yet we still sometimes react with this very like visceral anger about what someone does on this show that's meant to be backstabbing and lying, and that's why we love it. And so there's almost this like disconnect of like, I know why this person went on the show. I know what the show is supposed to be about, but I'm still mad at them for being part of it.
And I almost think that we'd be in a better place if people could actually, I know you had said earlier, Sierra, that they don't really view them as real people. They view them more as, and I think it would almost be better if they stopped viewing them as real people after the show was over. Because I think what's happening is like okay, if we watch Game of Thrones, Sierra, do you watch Game of Thrones? Have you watched
I
Game
don't.
Okay.
No, but I can pretend I do. What's it like? Mother of Dragons or something?
That's perfectly great.
But the thing is, like, in Game of Thrones, when somebody does something despicable, which happens every single episode, every character in that show does something despicable. After that's done, we all discuss it. But what ended up happening in the later seasons is we started yelling at the writers because we were mad at them for writing the character that way. The problem is with Survivor, there's no writers. So we don't have anybody to yell at except for the person who actually performed whatever. But like, we almost need to like remember like, and Game of Thrones references, but we almost need to remember that just because they're making that move, like view them as a Littlefinger, view them as a Mother of Dragons, view them as a Jon Snow. Don't view them as the writer. Remember that there is a writer above them. There is an editor who is telling you parts of the story.
Yeah. And there's a narrative that is being purposely structured in editing to make it entertaining for you. And I think that is a huge thing about how we perceive Survivor is what is the story of this season and how is what I'm being shown about these people affected by the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. This is a bit of a switch, but Sierra, a lot of pretty much all of the videos you put out, you're very positive, you're very upbeat. Do you see that your followers and people who are commenting, do you see that that's reflected in how they react to what you put out? Or do you kind of once in a while maybe get, maybe a bad egg is the wrong word, but do you see it reflected in what you're putting out? Yeah,
I think my larger community, so the people who are coming back to my videos, the people who are actively following me, your community is going to, the people who are going to be drawn to your community are usually going to be like you in some sense. And the kind of the values and the attitude of your community is going to be similar usually to what you're putting out online. And of course, there's always going to be new people who are finding that who maybe don't align and they leave a bad comment and then go. But for the most part, I think the community that kind of springs up around you is usually some sort of a reflection of what you're putting out.
You bring up that's a really good point, because Phil and I, we've been especially now that Survivor has paused for quite a while, we've been talking about just engaging with our patrons, and we did a trivia game with them recently. We actually get to meet them face to face on Zoom, but it was great. And they were like, oh my gosh, you're people. And we were like, oh my gosh, you're people. You're not just, these internet strangers. And then once in a while we get a comment on the side right there, and someone just says something terrible about Phil's beard or my hair or something. and they drop the comment, and like you said,
and they go. Yeah.
Totally go. But then on Survivor, like Phil said earlier, it's a game where you are supposed to do these morally questionable things. And then you do that. And then you come back and you are understandably confused why everyone hates you for it. So it's just, again, you're not in control of the situation. And that just makes it so much harder.
And a reason like why we wanted to have you, Sierra, aside from the fact that Rachel was like, you must have Sierra, but part of the reason why we wanted to have you was because it is positive. And like I had said when we were on Sister Nino's podcast that the Survivor has a problem with the word versus, and somebody had said it's not verse, it's verses. I know it's verses, but I speak fast because I'm from New Jersey. But they have a problem with the word versus, and I think that's also something that like America is starting to have right now, and I think that's kind of bleeding into what we see. Like as soon as somebody comes off the show, either you love Gabby or you hate Gabby. Either you love Christian or you hate. Like you can't be indifferent to anybody, or you can't just be like, I like Gabby's strategic gameplay. I hate that she cried all the time. Like you can't like differentiate those two things. And so I think like a lot of people miss that had you actually had a lot of the time, like you look for the positive out there. If you put the positive out there, there will be positive, but it seems like everybody just wants to go to the negative because it gets a rise a lot of the time out of the players. And I think that would be my number one bit of advice would be like engage some trolling, but don't engage it the way that some people engage it. Cause some people answer everything.
I think the more I think if there's something that you genuinely want to address and you're like, hey, I want to address what I said in this portion, or I want to address, how this is being perceived, I say do it. It's always best to clarify and be open. But I think when people start constantly engaging and responding to hate, it invites more of it, because then people go, oh, look, I got a response. Oh, I got them mad and they responded at this. And so that's a line I still try to balance, of me saying, I'm going to stand up for myself and I'm not going to let untrue things be said about me. But also, I can't just sit here and respond to all of this hate, because at the end of the day, that's just going to invite more in. And is it really productive for me? And is it really productive for them?
And one of the people, and I can't believe I'm going to say that they handled this the best, because they don't really handle their social media all that well, and I love calling them out. But Bradley back in Ghost Island actually had one of the best things, because everybody kept saying his mouth, it was so tiny, it was so tiny, it was so tiny, and he really jumped in on that and was just like, yeah, this is hilarious. And I hang out with Bradley a lot in LA, which neither one of us has been able to do anything, but like, it was funny because during that entire time, he'd be like, yeah, like, I love that they're talking about how small my mouth is. And like, yeah, he could only fit like one tine of a fork in his mouth at a time, because that's how small his mouth really is. But like, then it starts to get personal beyond that though, and it was like, at first it's like funny, and it's something you can just be like, all right, like every week that I'm on the show, they shrink my mouth by 1 inch or something, which is just ridiculous to such an extent that it's funny. But then all of a sudden it starts getting personal, where it's like, you're a bad person. We hate you. There's been players we know, Alexa, who their loved ones get death threats, not them, their loved ones. And it's like, why are we doing this?
Right. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I would love for a good meme to be made out of me, like Karishma, for example, like meme queen. But I'm sure in the moment, like for every great meme that came out, she was getting trashed on the internet. And I think I spend a lot of time on Survivor Reddit. I think for every funny meme and for every good comment you see there are people who just blindly hated Adam until he did an AMA, and now everybody loves him. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't feel, like you said, it doesn't need to be so black and white. And Sierra, like you said earlier, these people played Survivor, and then they're going to go live their life a year later, and they're going to just post normal things on their Instagram stories, and they're going to post a sunset picture, and people are still going to just roast them for it when they've moved on. But some people on the internet can't.
Right.
Yeah. And so Sierra, like when you were saying you grew up, you always wanted to play Survivor, you always could like imagine yourself playing the game. This was nothing we thought about, because we're like the same. I'm older than you, but we're still the same generation, where it's like, this wasn't what we thought about. I look at Tommy, he's, I think my age or a year younger, doesn't matter, but him and me grew up in the same area of the country. We grew up wanting to play the same game. He gets to play it. This was nothing we were thinking about when we were 8, 9, 10, 15 years old, being like, I'm going to go play a Survivor. And now I think it's one of the most important things you have to ask yourself before you go out there. Is this worth it for me?
Well, and I think the problem is, I would assume most people probably don't ask themselves that question, because you don't know how bad it's going to be until it happens to you. Because even if you're online and you're on Twitter and you're on the Survivor Reddit and you're reading, not so nice things people are saying about past players, you're not seeing the brunt of it. You're not seeing the things that they're getting sent privately. You're not seeing the death threats. You're not seeing all of that. And so you think, oh, I can handle a couple people telling me my hair is ugly, or I don't care if people say that I'm a backstabber and a liar, and I'm going to go and I'm going to play. But then you come home, and I would assume it would be a lot different than most people imagine.
Right. And Adam Klein put out a really good post, I think, after one of his moves on season 40. And he said, critique my gameplay. You can trash my gameplay all you want, but don't talk about my family. And I think that's something that, especially for Adam, who was so open with what was going on with his family. I think, like, I would like to think, okay, I can take it if someone makes a comment about my personality or something physically. I can deal with that because that's myself. But if you start, if you touch my family, if you touch my friends, if you touch like just anything outside of me and Survivor, that's where it feels like a massive line is crossed, but people will still do that.
And that's where I think it's difficult, because some people would say, oh, well, you sign up for that, right? When you play Survivor. But no, you don't. You signed up to play Survivor. You didn't sign up for people to talk horribly about your family and send you death threats. And I think there's a lot of that on YouTube too, of people being like, well, it comes with the job. You signed up for it. Well, you didn't. You signed up to be a YouTuber. You signed up to play Survivor. You didn't sign up to get death threats. And that's where I think, and I hope that moving forward, that the Survivor production team has seen kind of the backlash that the players have had to deal with, and can equip them with, some, I guess, even just preparation of what they're going to have to deal with when they get home, whether it's, counseling or just a guide on how to deal with that kind of backlash on social media. Because I think a lot of people come home and they don't know how to run a Twitter, or they don't know how to talk to the audience in a way that they'll be receptive to. And they don't know how to deal with that kind of hate and that level and magnitude. And so I hope that now that social media is becoming such a big part of the game, I hope that they start to take that into account with handling production.
Well, and I kind of hope that the editors keep it in mind too when they edit the show, and they don't put things out. Like, I'm all for, like, if somebody says something, they said it. But I'm also one of those, I do believe that there's probably a confessional from every single player out there, no matter how, much better they believe they are than the lowest member of their season. There is probably one confessional from every single player out there that is absolutely horrific and would make all of us go, oh, yikes, what was that?
Oh, yeah.
I just hope that they don't put those there unless the person really has crossed some sort of line that needs to be addressed. But I hope that we don't get the ones that are just, because every time I watch the show, and I ask this all the time anyway, because like I said, I don't really like being on social media, but I ask myself this all the time, like, how much further can it go before we all start to pull back and actually unite behind the fact that we have this great way of communicating with each other? And I'm like, how much further can the survivors' hatred for, like, the internet's, hatred for the survivors when they get off the show, how much further can it go before eventually it starts to back off, and, like, we don't think that they signed up for this amount of, like, abuse, which they go through abuse when they get back from the game.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I hope we start to see kind of a pullback from that, but I think it's one of those things where, like, only time will tell. And honestly, I think it's going to vary on each platform, because the way that people interact with survivors on Reddit is very different than Twitter, is very different than Facebook. And so I think we see different types of people and different types of fans flocking to different platforms. And so I think for smaller communities, like, your podcast or even Reddit, there's more hope for kind of this group of this movement of people saying, you know what, we're not going to talk about people like that anymore. We can critique their game. We can critique even, some things that they said on the show, but we're not going to move past that. Whereas I think on something like Facebook or Twitter, it's going to be harder to change the climate.
Right. And like what you said earlier, when people say, oh, well, you're a YouTuber, you signed up for that. You can also flip that. And as also a content consumer, I don't have to go on your YouTube page and just trash you. I could actually go out there and comment something good. And so I hope, and I think that it is, and we've all posted, like, stupid things before, just dumb opinions before. Every time I tweet something, I look it over and I just say, okay, is this something I want to put out there? And it's usually about sports or memes. So yes, but just taking that one extra step and saying, okay, I know, like, LeBron James is never going to meet me, and we'll never talk about whatever I tweet, but do I feel like putting something mean out there? What's the gain?
What's the benefit? Right.
What's the benefit? There's plenty of ways to be funny, and there's plenty of ways to get followers without having to make fun of somebody or be rude to somebody. And I think, I hope people on Twitter specifically or Reddit see that.
Yeah. And I think too, with, like, Facebook, at least you can kind of avoid people because it is harder to, like, see everything. Whereas if you go to Twitter, even people you don't follow, even people you don't even know exist, if they put something out and they said at Hannah Shapiro, everybody, like Hannah Shapiro's going to get that. You know what I mean? And like, that's what's annoying about it. And like Sarah Lucina had said on our podcast, she was like, I would look at this and I'm like, I am answering this guy's tweet. He has 1 follower and I'm not spending time with my son because I'm trying to defend myself. And like, it's kind of this whole thing of not all tweets are created equal. Like, there's some tweets that really are coming from places that do not need to be responded to,
Right.
you know? And I think that like, that's a good thing. I mean, the whole like going back, like if you're going to go on reality TV, go back and fix your, like, delete whatever you think is questionable, delete whatever could be controversial, delete it. But I also think like the whole going back through somebody's history, like 10 years, I didn't know when I first signed up for Facebook that it could be used against me in the future. You have that in the back of your mind, but you didn't think it would get to the point that it is now. I don't think I have anything on there that's terrible, but we don't know in 20 years. Half the stuff we're tweeting or saying could be like, wow, you really believe that, huh? And you're like, oh, at the time, everybody was like all about it. Like, because things have just changed so much. I don't know. I just hope that anybody who is listening to this, who's going to play Survivor in the future, that's like the whole point. Be like, try to stay positive on it. Try not to embrace the negative.
I would also say, I think anyone who's currently who's going to play Survivor and then their season is airing, I think they should just stay off social media. Yeah. I think they should have a family or a friend read through the accounts. If they want to post things, post it. Don't read the responses, because and then go get back on social media and if you want to be active on social media, do that after the season when the tensions aren't so high. But I think, you know, these players, these newer players, sitting there on their phone and reading Twitter as the show is airing, it's not healthy, because like you said, there's positive, there's good ways to critique someone. And then there's just the blatant hate. And the problem is when the show is airing, you're going to get a lot more of the blatant hate because it's the knee-jerk reaction of this thing happened on the show and I don't like it. Whereas when people are reflecting on and then kind of analyzing seasons past, you have a little bit more of that wider view. And so the critiques, I think, tend to be a little bit less brutal. Mm-hmm. But I think my main thing, especially when it comes to criticism, is not all criticism is created equal. And so I don't like the idea of lumping all, like, hate and death threats in with, someone saying, hey, I thought what you said in this part of the show was really problematic and hurtful, and here's why. And I think, we need to be careful about separating those two, and that it's okay to hold people that you like accountable. And it's okay to say, hey, I thought this thing that this person said was hurtful or wrong or whatever. But I think we need to do it more so in a way that we hold our friends accountable. And that if your friend does something you don't like or post something you don't like, you don't say, I hate you, I'm never talking to you again. Mm-hmm. You say, hey, I thought what you said was wrong and hurtful and problematic, and here's why. And you don't automatically just turn on them so quick, like you said, where everyone hated Adam Klein, and then Adam Klein did the AMA, and then everyone loves Adam Klein. And it shouldn't be that quick of a flip to switch. It should be, you can like some things that some people said and did, and then you can not like other things they did. And it doesn't have to be so, this is okay to say, this is not okay to say. You can never hold anyone accountable, or you can write them death threats. I think there's a gray area in between.
Yeah. Absolutely. And with, gosh, what was I saying? Oh, like with what you just said about Adam, and and for people, like poor Gabby gets destroyed on her season, and now everyone likes her. What changed? Mm-hmm. I'm sure Gabby's the exact same person. People are just not hating her because she's emotional on a game where you're not eating. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. So to me, that lesson is so blatantly in front of us, where it's just like, give someone the benefit of the doubt. You're watching 1 hour, you're watching 5 minutes of someone, or you're seeing one tweet. People are very, very complex, and there's so much more to people than just what they're choosing to put out on the internet. So, quote unquote, get to know that person better, and just give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Give them a chance to explain themselves.
I just like how, like, Alexa, we start our podcast whenever we have it. Well, who's your favorite player? Who's your favorite season? Everybody wants to talk about their favorites. There's a reason people want to talk about their favorites. It's because it's fun to talk about your favorites. Right. It still creates debate, and it still creates controversy. Heroes versus Villains isn't the best season, Sierra. Like, it's not. But we could have that. We could have that conversation and talk about that. And I think what's starting to happen is like people are no longer like, oh, well, it's not just that I like Christian more than Gabby. It's I love Christian and I hate Gabby. And like, I think it's like we've lost that like, oh, well, I still like heroes versus villains, but it's my number 3, not my number 1. And like, I like Gabby, but I like Christian more. It feels like we have to like just hate like crazy. And I don't know. I don't think I'll ever play Survivor. I don't think they'll ever ask me. I don't think like that I'm polarized or not polarizing enough, but I don't think I'm exciting enough for their TV screen. But I do like if I were ever going to play, like it would be something I would seriously consider where it'd be like, if I come back from this game, can I stay off of social media the whole time? Can I tune out the noise? Because I don't think I could. I know my personality. I'm type A as anything. I don't think I could keep it
neurotic.
I am.
Well, and also saying what's my plan when I come home, and what's my plan for handling social media, not just can I handle it, can I not, but saying, okay, you know, I'm gonna have a friend go through and, you know, read the responses so that I don't have to read them. Or I'm gonna post, but I'm not really gonna post too much until after the season airs, and drawing those lines and drawing those boundaries. But I thought what you said was really interesting, Phil, about like everyone loves to talk about their favorites, right? But no one likes to talk about, no one says who's your least favorite Survivor player. No one has that discussion. But when ranking from bottom to top, but no one really likes to talk about, like everyone likes to talk about that when the season's airing, but no one really reflects on a season and says this person is the worst Survivor player of all time. Although that would be funny in terms of like strategic worst player.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be a good discussion.
But it's even, I mean, even Sierra, it goes to like, everybody will say, what's your favorite movie? And you can think of 5 movies that come to your head right away. But if you say, what's the worst movie you've ever seen? You forget. Because when you sit down and you watch a movie, your knee-jerk thing to say is you turn to your friend and say, that's the worst movie I've ever seen. And then you move on. Right. And then you might say that 100 times, but you're not keeping a running tab in your head of like, what's the worst thing I've ever watched? Or like, what's the worst thing
worst one I've ever watched?
Yeah, like you just don't think like that.
You don't follow the producers of the worst movie that you ever watched on Twitter after and tweet them and say, this is the worst movie I've ever watched for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of times what ends up happening is the movies that end up getting hate on social media, much like the people who get hate on social media after they're on Survivor, are the movies that are well received, but have something problematic that people want to be like, I don't like this, but then it turns into, I hate this, as opposed to just, I don't like this. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating. We always talk about, the one thing we do talk about, what's the worst best picture to ever win best picture? Like those are the types of things people talk, because at least we can take the best and then rate our worst rather than this is the worst.
Right.
Interesting. Very interesting. Sierra, do you have anything else that we should cover here that we didn't cover? I know we've kind of just gone all over, but
no, I mean, and if you guys have any specific things you wanted to touch on or any questions that you wanted to go through or anything like that, but I feel like I'm good.
You tell us your least favorite season of Survivor.
Can you do it? Do you have it?
Do you have one?
I don't think so. Off the top of my head.
Love that.
That's the thing, is I don't think I've ever thought what is the worst. I've watched plenty of videos ranking them from best to worst, but I don't think off the top of my head.
It's like pizza. When it's bad, it's still good.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I love it. And I know we were just talking about how all hate isn't created equal, but all compliments are created equal. Because Alyssa Bush in here said, I'd vote for Phil over Trump or Biden. And I'm just like, yeah, I vote for me. I love me, of course. So I just want to say, I don't know who Alyssa Bush is. I don't know if she's like a big name. She might have one follower, but compliments are all created equal. Just the hate isn't created equal. That's how I feel about that. But I really hope that, see, like No Hype Network saying Crash is the worst best picture winner. I have so many wrong things to say about that. But I hope that this was useful for people who either are going on Survivor, even people who just are going to comment on other Survivor players' Twitters or anything like that when they get off the show, anything like that, because I know a lot of these people personally. Alexa knows a lot of these people personally. Sierra, I'm sure you know other people who are bigger than Survivors personally. And it's just like, I just hope that this makes people want to be like, maybe we shouldn't be so mean to it. At least this community. At least we could start with the Survivor community.
There you go. I think, and start with your community inside the Survivor community. And then I think that kind of permeates out. But I will say, I think Survivor is probably one of the less toxic fandoms that I engage in. I think there are other, shows and even just like fandoms that I engage in that can be really, really toxic. And I think Survivor tends to be relatively not.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, in the reality TV world, Phil and I don't watch Big Brother. I've heard Big Brother is tougher. And at the end of the day, I would rather be a Survivor villain than a Game of Thrones writer, because those poor people, I don't know what they probably live under a rock now.
They went from, we don't like this scene, to you guys should just die. Your finale sucked and we hate you. Like, that's pretty much what ended up happening. But yeah, so hopefully this does something. I mean, hopefully when there's going to be somebody who goes to play season 55 and is like, yeah, I listened to Phil, Alexa, and Sierra from back during the COVID pandemic, and they had a really great take on everything that was going on with social media, and it helped. I mean, I don't know. I hope so, because it started to get too much for me in season 40. I know, Sierra, you said there are other more negative places, and I totally agree. I mean, you open up Twitter, you don't have to type in, Survivor to find negativity. That's for sure. Yeah. But, I just, I don't know. It's starting to cross lines now, and I'm just like, oh, let's calm down a little bit. Yeah. Let's calm down. And here's Rachel, your friend, Sierra, not mine, who says the GOT writers deserve it all. Let's be honest. It's like, thanks, Rachel. Thanks for the support and listening.
What have you learned from the past 55 minutes, Rachel?
The only one who deserves it is the people who did all the graphics on Cats. They're the only ones who deserve that.
Yes. I think we can actually all agree on that. There is no doubt about that.
Bringing the world together.
That's what's going to unify us all.
Well,
graphics. Oh, goodness.
Well, Sierra, thanks again so much for joining us and talking like this. And hopefully you had fun. I mean, I know we didn't geek out super hard on Survivor. I know a lot of this was like more serious than just being like, oh, this is my favorite season, but I hope you enjoyed it.
I had so much fun. And if you guys ever need someone to just come on and run their mouth about Survivor, I'm happy to do it.
Awesome. That's what I love to hear.
Sierra, where can it feels weird that we have 9,000 YouTube subscribers are about to you. Where can people find you on YouTube and or social media?
You guys can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Schultzzie, SCHULTZZIE. And then you can find me on YouTube at Sierra Schultzzie.
There you go.
TikTok. Phil, maybe we should look into that.
I know. Alexa,
I've been wanting to TikTok, but I don't know anything.
Alexa, you can TikTok.
You have to text me about it, because TikTok is like, once you find your little community in TikTok and you realize it's not all just dancing teenagers and that there are other adults on it, you're like, oh, okay, cool. This is good.
Are you TikTok friends? I don't know how this works, but are you TikTok friends with Lauren Ashley Beck or no?
I am not. Oh, is she on TikTok? Now I have to go follow her on TikTok.
She does all the fun dances. See, that's the thing. I
can't do the dances.
In quarantine, I was like, I'll try that blinding light dance because that looks super doable, but no one would do it with me. So I'll look for the more like our age content and stay away from the dancing teenagers.
I wonder, is there a big Survivor community on TikTok?
I only know Lauren.
Or is it just Lauren?
Lauren's on it. I see on Reddit people make TikToks of like tribal councils or stuff, but I don't know. We'll have to dive into that one.
I love it. I love how I'm very anti-TikTok right now. And the next time Sierra comes on this podcast, I'm actually going to be living in the TikTok house. So
actually, Adam Klein, big TikToker.
Yes, Adam Klein, yeah.
His girlfriend does a lot of cool stuff on there.
Okay. Like, well, now I need to follow Lauren and Adam on TikTok.
There you go.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can find us on TikTok.
That's just her Boston accent.
I'm going to, that was a serious accent. We're going to have TikTok in 2 days, so stay tuned, everybody.
Do it.
Well, Alexa, how can everybody find us?
Well, if you guys want to leave us a very kind comment on social media, we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, soon to be TikTok. And we're on YouTube. We hit 9,000 subscribers, which is so exciting. So we really want to hit 10. So hit that subscribe button, say some nice things to us, leave a good comment. And Sierra, again, this was really, really fun. This was really different. Phil and I will make occasional comments about this stuff, but it was really good to have an actual sit down conversation and really hope people got something out of it. So
yeah, thanks for having me be part of it. I guess the last thing I would say about social media and Survivor is if you like someone, let them know, because people are a lot more likely to comment when they don't like someone than comment and say, hey, I really liked you on the show, or I really liked your podcast. And so if there's someone who you really liked on the show or a podcast that you really like, tell them, because it'll mean a lot to them.
I totally agree. Totally agree. All right, everybody, we'll end on that note because that was a positive note. And now I'm going to go back to my miserable life and yell at everybody.
Oh my gosh, no. Phil's gonna
All
go troll his way through TikTok now.
I'm going to go troll my way through. I'm just going to troll my way through life. That's what I do. Thanks for coming on, Sierra. We'll talk.